A total silence reigned over the vast ballroom, while crystal chandeliers reflected the tension thick in the air. At the epicenter of the scene stood Paul Allister, a wealthy, self-made man, elegantly dressed in a tuxedo, showcasing his sophisticated mistress to the social elite with a serious, arrogant gesture. The guests were astounded by the audacity displayed, murmuring discreetly in the corners of the room. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a young woman, clearly heavily pregnant, made her entrance. It was Alma, Paul's life partner, but that wasn't the only thing that surprised everyone. By her side was Enzo Roman, the elusive and powerful CEO, a tycoon recognized for his discretion, but who at that moment showed he was determined to protect her no matter what. The compromising situation was about to unleash, and no one in the room would leave without consequences. Chapter 1: The Gala of Deception. New York City. The city was home to one of the most luxurious and spacious ballrooms at the Crystal Renaissance Hotel. The expansive marble floors shone like mirrors, displaying the golden glints of the crystal chandeliers above. Flower arrangements imported from Amsterdam filled the atmosphere with the subtle aromas of tulips and lilies. A large number of attendees, dressed in their most elegant attire, mingled, exchanging greetings with gestures and talking about stock market values, luxury vessels, and potential future investments. The Bright Futures Gala, a renowned annual celebration in the city's high society, was recognized for its work in raising millions of dollars destined for the education of needy minors. Paul Allister, the evening's most awaited host, stood out for his imposing Kennedy-esque physical appearance. Of tall stature and with a special charm, he managed to progress from his humble beginnings, driven by limitless ambition. Not long ago, he used to be just another junior executive at Amber Tech. However, a stroke of fortune, or according to some, a smart move, led him to success when he bought a bankrupt software company for very little money and transformed it into a great empire in the digital world. By the time he reached 35, he already had a fortune exceeding $100 million. Despite having achieved success, his personality showed a latent arrogance that was clearly visible that night. Under the imposing presence of the crystal chandeliers and the elegant music of an orchestra interpreting pieces by Mozart, Paul made his arrival in a victorious manner. By his side was Lara Roberts, a stunning brunette who accompanied him at all times. For a long period of time, gossip had circulated about her persona. While some claimed she had been appointed as the new leader of the marketing department, others suggested she was a mysterious European celebrity. However, Paul's mischievous gaze revealed an even more shocking truth. Lara wore an impressive deep red dress that highlighted every contour of her figure, generating a stir of comments among those present. The statement was bold, especially because it was general knowledge that Paul had a wife. However, the presence of his wife, Alma Allister, shone by its absence. Taking the microphone, Paul's voice was heard clearly above the noise of the people. "We appreciate your presence at the Bright Futures Gala, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. An incredible night has been organized with a special surprise scheduled for later. Enjoy the celebration, and keep in mind that every dollar collected this evening will be used to strengthen the next generations." Showing a confident expression, he extended his arm to Lara and led her off the stage, where they were immediately received by the most prominent personalities of the locality. One of them, Mark Mendez, CEO of Mendez Industries, tapped him on the shoulder and arched an eyebrow as he directed his gaze toward Lara. Mark joked with Paul about his efficiency, speaking in a low voice to maintain discretion. Although loud enough for some curious listeners to catch the conversation, Paul showed a self-sufficient smile. He enjoyed being the center of attention very much, even when he crossed the limits of propriety. His source of energy came from conjecture and jealousy. He was unaware that his impressive show was about to crumble in an unexpected way. Given that Alma, his spouse, was in a state of pregnancy and was already 6 months along, she would soon join the family, and she was not alone. Next to her was Enzo Roman, the reclusive wealthy man recognized for his confidential charitable works. Paul thought he dominated the night. However, in reality, destiny and the law of karma were converging, and his situation was about to spiral completely out of control. Chapter 2. The Decision at Home. Before the celebration, Alma Allister found herself in the living room of her luxurious house on the urban outskirts, several hours before the event. The mansion demonstrated Paul's triumph, impressive columns, a long access path, and beautiful, perfectly maintained gardens that evoked the majesty of a castle. Despite everything, Alma found no comfort whatsoever. The extensive rooms and sunny gardens no longer provided her the same comfort they used to. Being 6 months pregnant, she perceived how Paul was distancing himself little by little. The man who used to give her foot massages and satisfy her cravings late at night now almost never shared the bed to sleep together. He always found himself busy with work meetings that extended until the late hours of the night. Alma tried to find a logical explanation, convincing herself that it was just a period of great pressure and responsibilities at work. However, she could no longer ignore the evidence that demonstrated the opposite. At first, she had chosen not to attend the Bright Futures event. She found herself exhausted, both in her body and her emotional state, and the pregnancy hormones intensified her anxiety. However, everything took an unexpected turn with a phone call. Audrey Courts, a lifelong friend of Paul and also the lead lawyer at his company, hesitated on the line when inviting her to accompany him to the ceremony. "Alma, I don't want to worry you, but Paul intends to bring someone tonight. Someone with whom he has been going out. It is imperative that you find yourself present in that place." The fear of the repercussions of expressing herself could be glimpsed in her whispering voice. The words resonated in Alma's ears, causing a rapid heartbeat in her chest. Instinctively, her hand went quickly towards her stomach. For some time, she had the hunch that Paul was being unfaithful to her. However, the idea that he would make it public represented an unbearable shame. A whirlwind of feelings, anger, suffering, disloyalty, took over her being. She ended the call without giving an answer, experiencing a burning sensation in her eyes because of the tears. In the following hour, Alma remained still next to the window of her elegant living room, contemplating how the light of the setting sun dyed the roses that Paul had planted. In the past, as a sign of love in gold. To what extent had the circumstances transformed? She pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the disloyalty burning her inside. At that precise moment, the house servant, Bernard, cleared his throat gently to indicate the presence of a guest. Alma turned with surprise upon realizing the presence of Enzo Roman entering through the door of her home. Enzo's arrival was a pleasant and comforting surprise. They shared a past together. Enzo had acted as a guide for Paul in his beginnings, which fostered the emergence of a friendship with Alma. However, with the passing of the years, he had taken distance from the public sphere, showing himself on rare occasions. With an expression of concern on his face, he spoke softly. "I have received worrying rumors about Paul. I am willing to offer you my support." Alma's tears sprang forth without being able to be stopped. Tonight he will go out with his mistress before an audience. It turns out incredible that he is doing this to me, especially at this moment. Enzo hesitated for an instant before placing a secure but understanding hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone in this, and you shouldn't face it without support. If you choose to go, you will count on my unconditional support. You have my total backing." Alma had trouble swallowing, perceiving how her determination strengthened. She would not continue to be the quiet and obedient wife who waited in silence. If Paul wished to show his mistress before the urban high society, she would not hesitate to stand up to him. She would not be in solitude. 2 hours passed, and Alma dressed in an elegant maternity dress in a deep blue tone. Upon observing herself in the mirror, she perceived the shine that her state of gestation and her growing decision granted her. She experienced how the energy flowed through her arteries. She got into Enzo's luxurious black car, and together they headed towards the celebration, without imagining that their arrival would provoke a series of events that would transform their destinies irrevocably. Chapter 3: The Ambition of Laura Roberts. Laura Roberts was familiar with the world of power and opulence. She was born in a humble neighborhood on the outskirts of the British capital, London, where she understood from an early age how fickle fortune can be. At the girl's age of 12, her dad was left without work, while her mom, who suffered from a chronic illness, struggled to keep the family economy stable. Poverty knocked on her door, carrying anguish with it. At that moment, Laura promised solemnly, "I will never again be in a position of weakness. I will never again experience poverty." In the stage of adolescence was when she managed to identify her innate skills. She possesses a keen mind, sharp intuition, and a beauty that cannot be denied. By the age of 20, she already maintained relationships with mature and successful men. Each bond improved her social position. Each individual offered her valuable teachings about business, relationships, and influence. In a short time, Laura realized that in the elite, not only did money have value, but also confidential information. She acquired skill in detecting secrets. After a series of successful commercial relationships that reported substantial benefits to her, she decided to embark on trips abroad. She attended select events in Monaco, Hong Kong, and Dubai. Finally, she arrived in the United States, where she established communication with prominent businessmen like Hector Fields, an influential real estate investor in New York City, and subsequently with a prominent magnate of the shipping sector in Los Angeles. However, those individuals only represented steps. Laura was in search of her longed-for prize, someone with the same desire for recognition as her, someone with whom she could stay close for a longer period. So she coincided with Paul Allister during an exclusive meeting of investors in San Francisco. It was not only his charm that conquered her. What truly captured her interest was the constant ambition he demonstrated and his ability to control any environment. She initiated her flirtation in a subtle way, maintaining extensive talks in hotels, going together to select dinners during trips. Paul stood out for his bravery and his intelligence, a captivating mix. Laura felt a great fascination. Paul not only possessed riches, he was on the verge of reaching the peaks of wealth globally. At that moment, Laura perceived a possibility, in a certain way. Spiritual connection. Paul, tired of his marriage, which seemed impeccable, saw himself captivated by the bravery and elegance of Laura. He enjoyed her ability to converse about the stock market and the global political situation in an instant, and in the next fascinate a complete group of influential individuals. However, Laura's desires went beyond being just a reserved mistress. Her desire was to be the focus of attention. She sought to have an impact. She wished to relate to the urban high society instead of going unnoticed in the corners of exclusive hotels. When Paul extended the invitation to attend the Bright Futures Gala together, she didn't think twice and accepted immediately. She almost boasted that that would be her prominent debut as an influential couple. However, he didn't specify how he would address the controversy of continuing to be married to Alma. Meanwhile, Laura enjoyed imagining how the most prominent figures of the city admired her. Furthermore, she had the hunch that soon Paul would make her an even more beneficial offer. On stage next to Paul, Laura Roberts experienced the sensation of having reached her goal. Those present murmured scandalously, which only made her ego grow. She had the determination to take advantage of that night, to ascend even more in the social hierarchy. She did not expect that the only woman whose position she wished to occupy would arrive suddenly together with one of the few men on the planet who can overshadow Paul Allister. Interaction question. Laura is determined to win, no matter the cost. Do you think ambition justifies her actions, or is she crossing a line? Let us know your thoughts. Chapter 4. The Past of Paul Allister. Before wearing personalized suits and showing radiant smiles in front of the cameras, Paul Allister was known as John, a young man who grew up on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, being the son of two middle-class parents who worked hard. From his childhood, Paul demonstrated an innate ability for the business world. He was the boy who converted a modest lemonade stand into a small chain, persuading his friends to invest money in exchange for a portion of the profits. Thanks to financial aid and part-time jobs, Paul managed to access a recognized academic institution of business, where his ambition was consolidated with firm determination. He registered his participation in all competitions, joined each of the business clubs, and established an extensive network of contacts in an unwavering manner. He was an object of admiration by his peers, although some commented in a low voice that he was excessively aggressive and ruthless in his way of acting. After finishing his studies, he managed to obtain an initial position at AmberTech, a medium-sized technology company. His tireless vitality was recognized by his bosses, who designated him to work on projects that demanded agile and original responses. With the passage of time, Paul formed an exclusive network of guides. In that era, Enzo Roman stood out as an influential investor in the field of venture capital. Enzo knew how to appreciate Paul's skills and included him in meetings of great importance, where he taught him to interpret the environment, convince possible investors, and emerge successful from uncomfortable circumstances. As Paul progressed, his vanity also grew. When confidential information reached him about a struggling startup that was dedicated to the development of artificial intelligence software for online sales, it was an important turning point. While some investors perceived a danger, Paul devised an invaluable opportunity. He gathered funds using both his savings and contributions from minority investors to acquire the startup at a cost considerably lower than its future value. In the subsequent years, he took charge of transforming the company with the purpose of creating sophisticated systems to study customer behavior. Luck paid them a pleasant visit. Also the market. Agreements were received from the main retail stores globally. He experienced a significant increase in his total wealth. Soon came luxury events, extravagant trips, and high-end properties. And at that moment, Alma appeared. They coincided for the first time at a gala event, where she served as a human resources consultant, and Paul was the main speaker. Her warmth and authenticity managed to penetrate the armor of ambition that Paul had. Their love flourished quickly. Although Enzo Roman had begun to doubt Paul's aggressive strategies, he felt impacted upon observing how Alma seemed to manage to make him show himself kinder. For a period, Paul experienced great happiness. The marriage became an event of high society, sophisticated, select, and the main topic of gossip magazines. However, triumph never managed to satisfy Paul's ambition. He deepened his participation in international business projects, concreting negotiations in Asia and the Middle East, and almost never returned to his home before midnight. Gradually, the affection he used to show Alma disappeared, being replaced by a feeling of constant discontent. He began to feel the pressure of finding a balance between his work responsibilities and his life and family. He observed the chains that limited his unstoppable progress. At that moment, the presence of Laura Roberts made itself present in his day-to-day. Her cold ambition resembled his. The relationship with her transformed into an exciting way to evade the monotony he perceived as a responsibility. At the Bright Future ceremony, Paul prepared to express his feelings with Laura by his side. However, in her gaze still shone the memory of the individual he used to be. Diligent employee, splendid, devoted with love. The real question resided in whether that vestige of conscience would have relevance upon facing his pregnant wife and the mentor he admired in the past. Chapter 5. The Arrival and the Shock. While heading towards the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, Alma took a deep breath in an attempt to calm herself before the tension of the moment. She refused to appear disheveled. What she really yearned for was to look calm, serene, even imposing. For a long time, she had performed as the understanding wife, offering understanding and additional opportunities without end. Tonight would have an unexpected turn. In the luxurious Bentley, Enzo Roman whispered with caution, "Are you completely sure you wish to carry out this action? Facing Paul in front of everyone will not turn out simple." Alma straightened her shoulders, while her hands rested tenderly on her bulging belly. "I need to carry out that task. I will not allow him to think he can show his mischief without facing the repercussions. If I hide, he results victorious. I feel exhausted from being a mere observer in my own existence." From her purse, she extracted an envelope and a bulky manila file full of papers. It constituted her hidden resource. In the past month, upon the increasing uncertainties about Paul, she decided to employ a private detective, besides recording his disloyalty, also to investigate his commercial activities thoroughly. She received the results a few days ago and was completely surprised. Deceptive operations, clandestine impressions not reported, accounts abroad that generate suspicions. Paul moved within the limits of what was allowed by the law. The disclosure of this information could lead him to ruin. However, Alma did not intend to finish him. Not yet. She wanted to make it clear to him that she was not a credulous person. If Paul believed he could separate from her without saying anything and push her away without her opposing, he was completely wrong. Here is the document of his insurance directed to her, directed to his little one. Upon reviewing the document, Enzo identified the authorized stamps and the records of income and expenses. He showed a serious countenance. "The situation is grave. In case the Securities Commission or any competent authority examined said documents," Alma pursued her lips. "I understand, but it is the only point in my favor. I do not intend to share them, unless he forces me to do so." On this occasion, Paul would have to face the ramifications of his decisions. Enzo nodded, showing on his face a combination of admiration and restlessness. In the past, he used to consider Paul as someone he supported, an individual with the ability to transform the world into something more positive. At this moment, the individual in question was on the verge of a big problem. Perhaps he even manages to escape jail. However, his loyalty was towards Alma and the child she expected. Perhaps this confrontation would manage to make Paul recover a little spontaneity. Upon the arrival of the luxurious black Bentley at the entrance of the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, the cameras did not stop shooting. The photographers waited to capture images of famous people and entrepreneurs. However, upon spotting Enzo Roman descending from the vehicle next to Paul Allister's pregnant partner, the crowd went crazy. The microphones extended, the cameras flashed, the air filled with shouted questions. Alma took a deep breath. She took the hand that Enzo extended to her and let herself be led along the crimson carpet. Upon entering the lobby, she perceived the tension that floated in the environment. Stealthy looks, whispers moving from one place to another, with great intensity, beat her heart. However, her eyes reflected an unwavering determination. In a short time, She would find herself face to face with Paul and his partner. When that instant arrived, she would not yield to the pressure. On this occasion, it will not be possible. Enzo Roman's renown was heard in the most select circles. 10 years ago, his investment company, Roman Capital, had caused a great impact in the technological field by backing innovative startups. The investments he made had a significant impact on the development of current online commerce and artificial intelligence technology. Thanks to his almost magical capacity to identify successful companies, he became a legendary figure. However, everything changed as a result of a tragic event, the death of his little sister in a car crash. He announced his definitive withdrawal from the public sphere, immersing himself in charitable initiatives in remote and neglected places on the planet. At the Bright Futures Gala, his presence was a complete surprise to everyone, not even as the defender of Alma Alistair. Gossip spread among those present. Did Alma and Enzo maintain a romantic relationship? Was it a large-scale business strategy? Some kept in mind that Enzo had acted as a guide for Paul, which simply increased the controversy, the confrontation that is coming. Upon Enzo and Alma entering the spacious hall, silence took over all those present. Enzo, of elevated stature and thin, wore an impeccable outfit that transmitted a controlled serenity and a natural elegance that stood out against Paul's ostentatious presumption. While Paul boasted of his recent fortune, Enzo represented the elegance of yesteryear. He guided Alma with determination through the crowd. He decided not to answer the reporter's questions. She was his only concern. Inside, Alma expressed her gratitude. Although surrounded by curious looks and whispers, she experienced an unusual calm by his side. The previous anxiety disappeared, being replaced by an iron determination. United, they showed an image of great cohesion, the betrayed wife, guarded by an influential individual. Chapter 6. The Rooftop Showdown. In the other corner of the room, Paul and Lara chatted with Mark Mendez and a select group of investors. Upon observing Alma arrive accompanied by Enzo, his confident expression faltered briefly. A flash of fear was reflected in his look. He recovered quickly, outlining a forced smile. Upon pressing his elbow with excessive force, Lara perceived the rigidity in his arm. Paul whispered with tension upon seeing Enzo present. Lara showed a gesture of disapproval. And what does that matter? How would you describe that person? Paul Treg, who used to be my mentor in the past. He turned his head, and his voice reduced to a barely audible whisper. Look, that one! The woman who is next to him is my spouse. In the opposite corner of the room, Enzo maintained visual contact with Paul. He responded with a subtle gesture of agreement, although letting his disapproval be clearly seen. Alma also raised her chin. She had no intention of backing down. She was heading directly towards him, the person who had been disloyal to her. Lara realized immediately the seriousness of the situation. If Enzo Roman had participation in the matter, this was not solely about a conflict between spouses. Paul let out a sigh, undoing the blow. He put a hand possessively on Lara's waist. Guiding her with feigned tranquility, he led her towards the couple that had just arrived. A moment of stillness spread among the assistants. The four characters stood a short distance between them, while an imperceptible storm crackled in the environment. With an expression of tension on his face, Paul finally spoke, thus breaking the silence. Wow, Alma, I did not expect your visit for tonight. He took a quick look at Enzo before focusing back on her herself. I observe that you have come accompanied by a very elegant person. Alma showed serenity on her face, although with an icy touch. Greetings, Paul. I wish not to be disturbing your special evening. At that moment, Enzo nodded slightly, indicating that he was present to support her. Regardless of what happened next, the shock that would transform everything, those present held their breath, perceiving that something of great magnitude was about to happen. From the stands, They witnessed Paul Allister and his pregnant wife confronting each other directly, each one supported by their respective ally. In the background, the string group continued interpreting a melody that resonated dissonantly amidst the atmosphere, charged with tension that enveloped the entire hall. Alma noticed how her heart beat faster upon contemplating Paul. The memories rammed her with the force of violent waves. The day they got married, enjoying the calm of the nights around the fire of the fireplace when they realized they were going to become dads. However, the person in front of her now resulted more unknown to her than the affectionate husband he used to be. Paul outlined a captivating smile. "What a surprise to find you around here, Alma. You look radiant. I thought you would be relaxing in your home." The superficial conversation he attempted was almost laughable. Before Alma could give an answer, Laura, who still held his arm, took the word. "I was summoned by Paul to collaborate in the planning of the gala event," Laura said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "On this occasion, the evening is significant for the Bright Futures organization, and my commitment to solidarity action is profound." The sweet and excessive tone of Laura only fueled Alma's anger. Despite feeling the nails sinking into her hands, she managed to maintain a calm tone of voice. "What a gentle gesture, Laura. I am convinced that your commitment to Paul's causes transcends mere philanthropy." A whisper spread among the assistants. Laura stiffened with her eyes shining with repressed anger. Paul no longer showed a smile. On his face was reflected a severe and precautionary look. However, he was completely wrong if he believed that Alma would back down. Alma continued advancing, now focusing her attention directly on Paul. "I have come to be able to contemplate the person you are showing." Her vocal tone became sharp. "Furthermore, it is important that you take into account that both our son and I will not be excluded." Next to her, Enzo placed a secure and comforting hand on her arm. Subsequently, he expressed himself verbally. He showed calm in his voice, but transmitted a strong authority. "Paul, I feel disappointed in you." The silence became even more intense. "This individual is not the one to whom I provided guidance in the past. The shame you are causing your wife is not up to the height of your person under everything we have been striving for." Enzo's words had an impact on him, generating a flash of regret before his expression became firm again. It was impossible for him to see himself enveloped in a ruckus. Here is not the place, in the presence of other people. He observed the crowd with anticipation in his eyes. The main thing was his appearance. "I consider it convenient to continue this chat confidentially." "Enzo is coming with me," Alma said. "Fine. What do you think if we head to the balcony?" The gifts separated, opening the way, as if they were dividing the Red Sea. The four individuals, accompanied by some of the most interested guests, crossed the elegant double doors that led to the outside. However, the main room did not recover its habitual state. The whispering speculations and the frenetic messages followed their trajectory. The confrontation on the rooftop, in the distance, the city lights flashed, creating an ironic contrast with the darkness that stood between them. A slight breeze caressed their faces, although it failed to calm the tension present in the environment. Paul turned towards Alma, clearly showing his frustration in his voice. "What is the reason for bringing Enzo to this place?" He frowned. "Why embarrass me in front of everyone?" The tears shone in Alma's eyes, although her voice remained decided. "Do you want me to put you in your place?" A laugh full of sadness escaped her lips. "You show your partner in public while I expect a child of yours." She took a step forward. "Did you sincerely think I would remain silent?" Laura wanted to say something, but Enzo silenced her with a cold look. Then he approached Paul. "You must act with dignity if you still value Alma's feelings." For a moment, Paul's shoulders slumped. A flash of remorse was reflected in his expression. However, at that moment, Laura grabbed his arm, a small warning of the path he had selected. Paul found himself in a difficult situation, with the totality of the city, and most relevantly, with the spirit, waiting to observe the decision he would take. The outcome of the story, the dispute on the rooftop, ended immediately. Lara pretended to be indignant, interpreting the role of an offended girlfriend. However, several observed that her fury seemed to arise mainly from the threat to her personal goals, instead of a sincere affection towards Paul. With eyes full of tears, Alma turned. She did not allow his lover to witness her fragility. Enzo accompanied the woman to the exit of the terrace, offering her an elegant way to leave a very dishonorable situation. Upon returning to the hall, they were received by a crowd of curious looks and murmurs. Alma's heart palpitated with intensity, experiencing a combination of fury, suffering, and a newly found resolution. She thanked Enzo deeply for being always by her side, grabbing strongly to his arm. Meanwhile, on the balcony, Paul and Lara lagged behind. The tension that existed between them was evident. In a low voice, Lara murmured, "It was a shameful situation." Lara directed him a look full of repressed anger. "Why didn't you warn me of the presence of your wife in this place? And also in a state of gestation, and next to Enzo Roman, from among all people." Paul passed his hand through his hair, letting out a sigh of discontent. "I did not expect Alma to come. I really did not expect this to happen." He directed a look towards Lara, questioning his choices for a brief moment. "Remember that it was you who insisted that our relationship be known publicly. Here you have the result, as you requested." Lara narrowed her eyes. "Now it turns out that the fault is mine." She leaned gently in his direction. "You notice the way in which Enzo observed you. He has the ability to finish you. If he doesn't start investigating your financial or commercial affairs, consider that you are lucky." A shine of fear ran through Paul's face. Lara was correct. In the case that Enzo opted to employ his own means to his detriment, the repercussions could be disastrous. However, Paul would not allow them to intimidate him. He stood up, arranged his clothing, and assumed his characteristic attitude of dominance. "Let's avoid assembling a spectacle." He emitted a cold and analytical tone. "Let's conclude our responsibilities in this place. Subsequently, we will converse in private about what our next movement will be." CTA, mid-story. Alma stood her ground with such grace. If you are rooting for her and Enzo to take Paul down, hit the like button now. Chapter 7. The Gossip and Its Effects. Meanwhile, inside the room, the adventure continued developing. Upon going up to the stage, the presenter encouraged the benefactors to commit to the support of the Bright Futures Foundation. While on the digital screen, enormous amounts of money were shown. Those present in the room applauded. However, under the appearance of generosity, the authentic narration of the evening kept everyone captive. In social networks, the images of Alma and Enzo arriving together flooded the feeds. In a few minutes, sensationalist headlines emerged. Millionaire Enzo Roman saves his wife from public shame caused by the magnate's infidelity. Chat in a secluded place. Alma and Enzo discovered a place next to the drinks area. A group of individuals approached with courtesy and concern, while the vast majority preferred to maintain a prudent distance. Alma asked for a glass of water from the waiter, but barely tasted it. Although the room overflowed with people, the cold took over her. Inclining towards her, Enzo spoke in a low voice, so that only she could hear him. "I am glad that you have known how to defend yourself. However, your level of anxiety disturbs me." He took a moment of rest. "Perhaps it would be convenient for us to leave." There was uncertainty in Alma's heart. Despite her fatigue, something inside her refused to leave. "It is necessary that I show him that he does not have the ability to cause me fear." She held the container firmly with her fingers. "I will remain an additional while, at least until the main promotions finish." Enzo nodded, as a sign of respect, towards the other person's choice. Deep down, His admiration towards her grew, while he experienced a brief feeling of guilt. He had collaborated in Paul's promotion. He would never have imagined how the influence of power could come to corrupt him. At that moment, he swore in silence to protect Alma from any storm that Paul could provoke. During the course of the event, a latent emotion was perceived that extended among the assistants. The question was on everyone's lips. Would Alma depart amidst a sea of tears, or would she remain serene and impassive? Will Paul's reputation be able to resist this evident act of disloyalty? Or will it be affected completely despite his economic power and his influence? Only the course of time, and perhaps Enzo Roman's next play, would reveal the truth. After the celebration of the gala, the gossip spread in an unbridled way, like an uncontrollable storm. Several yellow newspapers published shocking headlines. Confrontation between magnates that shocked high society. Meanwhile, in the society sections, anonymous stories were shared with interesting information about Lara's brave exposure before the public. Despite her anguish, Alma found comfort in the avalanche of support they offered her. Friends of yesteryear, even people without prior relation, individuals who felt identified with her suffering, an unusual alliance of collaborators. However, she was not in solitude. Several people joined her cause immediately. Audrey Courts, who has been Paul's friend since childhood, now performs the role of legal advisor in the company. After the initial warning, she intensified her actions to assist her. She arranged meetings with prestigious lawyers specialized in divorce cases. She collaborated in obtaining more evidence about the opacity in Paul's finances. In case a legal dispute arose, Alma would be prepared. Alma would be Marianne Cabot, a prominent benefactor who exercised a great influence as Alma's mentor at the beginning of her career in the field of public communication. She had always appreciated Alma's commitment to solidarity works. Annoyed by the way Paul treated Alma in public, she obtained social support in her defense. Every time Paul tried to modify the story to show Alma as unstable or jealous, he ran into strong opposition from prominent personalities of high society. Mark Mendez, executive director and former close companion of Paul. After witnessing the shameful situation that Alma lived in public, he reflected on his friendship relationship with Paul. He approached Enzo showing his anger. He proposed putting Alma in contact with specialists in finance who could analyze confidentially Paul's possessions and guarantee the security of her and her son in case of an eventual separation. Alma, who used to be afraid of being alone and unprotected, suddenly saw herself surrounded by a series of influential collaborators. Her position turned out not to be as fragile as Paul had thought. Enzo's help in the gossip. During that time, Enzo maintained constant communication. He used to go to Alma's house. He watched over the well-being of the mother and the little one. His company transformed into an invariable refuge. However, quickly the conjectures began. Some sensationalist newspapers suggested the existence of a hidden love relationship. Enzo Roman, the brave warrior, snatching the woman from a wealthy man, decided to ignore those gossips. Enzo did too. However, for Paul, it turned out impossible to achieve it. It was at that initial moment when he realized that he was at risk of being left with nothing. Not only did he lose his power, but also the only woman who loved him sincerely. Her trust was placed in Enzo. She was aware that his purpose was exclusively careful and altruistic. This individual trusted in amending situations of inequality. For Paul, the new collaboration between Alma and Enzo awakened in him a combination of anger and mistrust. He was warned about the legal preparations that Alma was carrying out. Desperation took over Paul. He made telephone communications during the night with his legal representatives. He examined his financial affairs in a frenetic way, trying to keep secret any illegal conduct. He initiated a private inquiry with the purpose of identifying the person who was revealing data to Alma. However, he could not manage to regain control, as everything slipped out of his hands. Every time he tried to stand out in a public event together with Laura, the media always highlighted Alma's elegance and Enzo's solidarity work. The investors began to feel concern. They considered that the commotion would have repercussions on Paul's commercial activities. Tensions increased in private. The question was not if a revenge would occur, but when it would occur. And who would hold the definitive authority at the moment when everything collapsed? Chapter 8. The Fall of Paul Allister. The first true impact. The first indication of the catastrophe that was coming for Paul Allister presented itself through a formal written communication. The Securities and Exchange Commission required the presentation of documents linked to his accounts abroad, which he naively thought were hidden behind structures of fictitious companies. A person somewhere had notified the authorities. He could not confirm it, but he had the hunch that Enzo was involved, even Audrey, or perhaps even from another place. He was dominated by paranoia, sleepless evenings, desperate contacts with his team of lawyers. If the investigation of the Securities and Exchange Commission did not turn out adequate, in addition, his connection with Laura also began to deteriorate. Laura had not registered her participation in this activity. She was not interested in a man who was being investigated, since his wealth could be seized if the accusations against him were proven. She began to absent herself from her commitments, justifying herself with relevant work matters. The intense connection between them turned into a charged environment, both pointing at each other for lack of loyalty. When Laura decided that she was willing to withdraw, if Paul's company began to crumble, Paul's life begins to crumble. A forthcoming legal controversy, a passionate woman showing signs of impatience, and an empire in crisis. Paul began to lose control. The workers murmured about the inconstant conduct he had. Any person that he perceived as disloyal was fired in a sudden manner. He postponed important meetings at the last moment. He even came to show lack of control before important investors. Meanwhile, Alma continued her advance with tranquility and accuracy. With Audrey's collaboration, documents, text messages and photographs that evidenced Paul's faults, both in his personal and professional life, were compiled. However, there existed a part of her that showed uncertainty. She wished to present a section in its entirety, make him face the repercussions of his disloyalty. However, in her memory remained alive the memory of the man, who at some point was the love of her life. She had knowledge that causing him total damage would also harm her son, a child who deserved a father without problems, nor being behind bars. However, Alma would also give importance to protecting her personal well-being. She entrusted her legal team with the elaboration of a confidential divorce demand. In case Paul rejected a fair deal, it would be enough for her to give the corresponding instruction for everything to be activated. She would be prepared to respond if he tried to play dirty. Enzo's power. Meanwhile, Enzo was strategically positioning his own chips. He made use of his connections to ensure the protection and tranquility of Alma. A group of investigators faithful to him found new evidences about Paul's anomalies: unreported money, transactions using confidential information, corruption in the international field. Gradually, Enzo erected a defensive barrier around Alma and what would come. He never defended the idea of taking reprisals, solely for the sake of equity. Paul's fall. Quickly, the gossips about his prompt decadence spread. The board directors began to question his capacity to lead. It was proposed to change him with the purpose of protecting the image of the company. The situation only increased Paul's anguish. The dominion of his company escaped him. The narrative escaped his hands. Furthermore, The most shameful thing was that he could no longer dominate his wife, whom he considered submissive. Then came the definitive blow. Lara prepared her luggage at nightfall. She left only a short message. She was not willing to endanger her future for a ship that was sinking. Upon discovering that she was leaving, Paul experienced a combination of disloyalty and a disturbing relief. She no longer formed part of the situation. However, at that moment, he found himself totally isolated, facing a storm that he had unleashed on his own. From his luxurious penthouse, he remained standing, observing the bright urban lights, that city that in the past symbolized his unstoppable growth. In the end, he had to confront the harsh reality. With ambition and cunning, he built an empire, making use of deceptive strategies. Alma, the woman he despised, unleashed everything. He debated between blaming her or assuming the guilt. Chapter 9. Lara's New Path. Lara Roberts continues active. Paul had left behind the loft. However, when he left, it was not escaping. In the elegant room of the Falcon Hotel, she enjoyed champagne while reviewing the news headlines with the tip of her finger. The decadence of Paul Allister's reign is evident. She looked attentively with a thoughtful smile, evaluating what alternatives she had. What is the reason? Despite the fact that she liked the luxurious life of high society, she never planned to sink with the ship. Her way of living was conditioned by her need to be in tune with power. Now that Paul had got rid of him, it was time to look for her next great achievement. She began to withdraw strategically, verifying that there were no compromising proofs in Paul's house. Each high-priced purse, each article of jewelry that he had given her, was meticulously stored in a safety deposit box rented under a false name. She had practical knowledge of how fast assets could be confiscated during a legal chaos. While Paul struggled to keep his empire afloat, Lara found herself already investigating her next possibility. She counted on an extensive network of contacts at a global level, formed by magnates, executives, and members of the aristocracy, who would welcome her with enthusiasm, captivated by her grace and skill in social events. However, something worried her. The presence of Enzo Roman, the strong energy he gave off, and the admiration he generated awakened her curiosity beyond what she was willing to recognize. She evoked the intense look he dedicated to her during the gala event, without feeling any emotion, without showing interest, almost with disinterest. Gentlemen did everything possible to capture Lara's attention and get her to look at them once more. On the contrary, Enzo seemed not to be affected by her attractiveness and did not pay attention to Paul's show. Lara's plan. She tried to obtain more information about him. It was commented that he possessed an ancestral wealth, was committed to charitable works, and maintained a solid ethical compass. Just the type of man who almost never fell into the ruses that Lara had used so much on previous occasions. Despite everything, she could not get the idea of gaining his approval out of her head. If Paul's fall was something that could not be avoided, associating with someone like Enzo Roman could be the next step on her path. Through a discreet intermediary at Roman capital, Lara coordinated a casual meeting at an auction of artistic works. She wore an elegant black dress and showed an expression of serenity and refinement. However, upon arriving, Enzo barely took a look at her. His presence in that place was due to altruistic motives, participating in an auction of paintings to support a charity entity of the area. Lara tried to engage in an informal chat. However, Enzo answered with kindness but without much closeness. He was fully aware of her identity and the great impact she had had on the emotional pain. Without hesitating, Lara opted to use her last strategy, honesty. After having obtained a painting, she was approached by him. With a gentle tone, she expressed, "I never had the intention of hurting anyone." Paul shared with me a different version about his marriage, indicating that it had already come to an end, and that his wife simply sought his fortune to ascend in society. Enzo's bright blue eyes reflected a barely hidden contempt. Did you really trust him? Or perhaps it was the narration of the events that favored you the most? A crimson blush appeared on Lara's cheeks. Perhaps I acted in an innocent way. Now I managed to visualize it. I am not the bad one that everyone describes. I am passionate about philanthropy. Perhaps we could consider it. With a brusque gesture of his head, Enzo interrupted her. If you really wish to fix what you damaged, start by apologizing sincerely. Try not to cross her path. He turned his back and left, leaving Lara observing him with astonishment. Suddenly, all her detailed projects crumbled in front of a forceful refusal. At that moment, she realized that Enzo Roman was not only resistant to her attractiveness, but despised it. Lara found herself for the first time without a defined path to progress in the social hierarchy. Despite keeping her sagacity intact, she felt in a disturbing way that in a universe influenced by protectors of ethics like Enzo, her dominion as the sovereign of the opportunistic was reaching its conclusion. Chapter 10. Redemption and New Life. As the investigation advanced, Paul saw himself confronted with the raw possibility of being signaled if more compromising proofs appeared. Desperation drove him to ask for a private appointment with Enzo Roman. Perhaps he considered his ex-mentor would provide him help in the difficult moment, or would prefer not to reveal any compromising information he might possess. Paul decided to call, despite having to put aside his pride. In a luxurious private club in the heart of the city, they coincided in an elegant meeting room with glass walls. Paul presented himself with an attitude of feigned security, despite the fact that the dark circles under his eyes revealed another reality. In that place, Enzo already found himself with his hands joined on the dark wooden table and an imperturbable expression on his face. After a moment of silence charged with tension, Paul broke the silence. He expressed his gratitude for Enzo's willingness to meet with him. Enzo, for his part, reacted surprised upon hearing Paul's full name. The latter reminded Enzo that the reason for the meeting was urgent. "I'm attentive to what you say." Paul cleared his throat, feeling it dry with the words stuck in his mouth. "I understand that you do not agree with what happened with Alma. Although I have had failures, I do not consider it fair that I lose everything. We two share a past together. In the past, you have considered me as your pupil." Enzo's look remained unwavering. "It happened prior to your deviation from ethical principles and proper conduct." Paul felt a flash of anger, but managed to control himself, making an effort to maintain serenity in his tone of voice. "Could you give me a hand, please? I am aware that you count on connections in the regulatory entities. In the case that you could advocate in my favor, it would be possible to solve this situation and perform a reimbursement. Do what you want, but prevent me from being ruined. I'm expecting the arrival of a new member of the family." Enzo plunged into his thoughts for an instant. The admiration he felt for Paul had transformed into disappointment. "Are you aware of the actions you took against Alma in relation to your future son, who has not yet arrived in the world? While she waited for your son, you showed another woman in society." Paul directed his sight downwards. The facade of strength that he tried to maintain collapsed completely. "Alma always proved to be too generous with me. Now, I managed to visualize it. Enzo, do you have knowledge about the functioning of this world? In case of being signaled by the prosecution, my image will be completely damaged. I will not be able to meet the needs of my son as I had planned." Enzo let out a prolonged and controlled sigh. "There exists the possibility of engaging in conversations with specific individuals who could offer you the opportunity to reveal your commercial activities abroad, although it does not guarantee the absolution of your reputation. The regulations must be complied with. In case of opting to hide information or trying to influence the system, you will find yourself without support. Agreed. Paul gave a sip of saliva and nodded immediately. I am willing to do everything that is needed. Collaborate. Enzo sat reclining his back in the chair. A glimpse of melancholy was reflected in his countenance. You must apologize to Alma. It is also necessary to reach a fair agreement for both her and the baby. In case you do not comply, I will ensure that every evidence is delivered directly to the authorities. Despite the pain the words caused him, Paul realized that this was possibly the only occasion he had to maintain a little dignity. I have short hair. Thanks, Enzo. You can trust that I will remember this. Enzo got up, considering the meeting finished. You must not break that commitment under any circumstance. When he left the exclusive club, Paul experienced a combination of sensations, relief, and fear. He understood that to redeem himself, he had to put aside his pride, admit his mistakes, and reconcile with Alma. It would turn out complicated, especially for an individual whose existence had been based on ambition and on the inability to demonstrate vulnerability. Perhaps, even in the most difficult moment, he could find a way to rescue what truly had value. Paul's decline. In the subsequent weeks, Paul saw himself immersed in a complicated process to minimize the damages. Following Enzo's warning, the inspection of the Securities and Exchange Commission did not stop simply because of his attempt to engage in a confidential chat with the CEO. However, thanks to the realization of voluntary disclosures, the collaboration with the investigators, and the compensation to the injured parties, he managed to obtain a relief. He managed to close a deal that avoided him facing the most unfavorable situation, a judicial process in its entirety. However, the economic sanctions and the damage to his public image turned out catastrophic. The shareholders demanded a change in the direction, which led him to resign from his position as the highest responsible person of his company. The determination of the board of directors was taken quickly. They opted for an experienced temporary executive, an experienced professional of the company. Paul saw himself limited to performing a solely representative role, lacking true power. The media did not take long to take advantage of the situation. The man previously praised for his business vision now found himself involved in a scandal that tarnished his reputation. Every time his name was mentioned, they highlighted his amorous deceptions, converting him into a lesson about the risks of trusting in excess. Alma's dessert. The events were observed by Alma with mixed emotions. She did not manage to feel total happiness for his failure, since she still had fresh in her memory the man with whom she contracted marriage, the one who used to put flowers in her hair on a peaceful Sunday afternoon. But the affliction he caused her required to be repaired. The connection between them was so deteriorated that it turned out irrecoverable. However, for the benefit of her future son, Alma opted to follow a route of sensible collaboration. The divorce process was initiated by the legal team, which proposed a settlement plan to ensure the economic sustenance of the son, without undermining Paul's dignity. She insisted on getting full custody with the condition that Paul could make periodic visits as long as he showed a true commitment to improve. For several weeks, Paul maintained his reservations, believing that it was about a ruse, but upon there being no more consequences, he realized Alma's honesty. At the moment of signing the divorce agreement, he experienced an intense sensation of emptiness, recognizing that he had squandered something of incalculable value. Lara's recent journey. Lara's life experienced a sudden change. After Enzo's rejection, she briefly contemplated the possibility of approaching other wealthy suitors. However, her reputation was affected upon being linked with Paul's scandal, which prevented her from accessing various opportunities. She tried to improve her image, resorting to charity, using ironically the relationships she had established during her brief time together with Paul. She established a charitable organization focused on teaching reading and writing to children, possibly with the intention of improving her reputation. Regardless of whether it was authentic or not, the proposal offered her the possibility to start again. With the passage of years, she managed to gather a small number of followers, although she never recovered the relevance she used to have compared to the time in which she was under Paul's influence. The development of Enzo and Alma. Regarding Enzo Roman, his function as Alma's collaborator transformed into something of greater meaning. From the beginning, the relationship was based on reciprocal respect and the ability to put oneself in the other's place. Enzo felt a deep admiration for the strength she possessed. Alma valued deeply his firm commitment to honesty. They dedicated long moments to dialogue about solidarity projects, charitable entities of the area, and creative ways to provide support to disadvantaged groups. Alma realized that Enzo's generosity was driven by a painful personal experience. The early loss of his sister led him to want to transform the world into a place more full of compassion. At the moment when Alma had her daughter Isabel Allister, Enzo was one of the first to go see her at the medical center. He carried with him a modest bouquet of lilies that stood out against the striking gifts of the other acquaintances. The gesture moved Alma, and together they enjoyed a moment of silence, observing the girl, who carried in her veins Paul's legacy and Alma's firmness. The innocent look of Isabel made Alma reflect on the great load of responsibility that now fell on her. Paul's effort to redeem himself. During the months that followed, Paul strove to improve his role as a father, initiating with encounters under supervision. At the beginning, he held Isabel with trembling arms and eyes moistened by crying. Alma found herself in a dilemma upon trying to distinguish if the tears he shed were product of guilt or of a sincere love. However, she decided to give him the opportunity to strengthen his connection with his daughter. Paul did not try to reconcile in his marriage again. Perhaps he had become aware of the irreversible nature of his actions. Instead of that, he centered his efforts on re-establishing a little of the trust with Alma, but only regarding the upbringing they share. There were days that turned out simpler than the others. Paul embarked on a therapy process, a choice that even took him by surprise. During those meetings, he had to deal with the doubts he dragged since his childhood, which had driven his tireless search for achievements. He had to admit that his search for approval had prevented him from seeing the emotional damage he had caused in others, especially in Alma. Although he advanced slowly, the progress was clearly noticed. Despite the fact that in the business field, he was still considered as someone marginalized, he found possibilities in less conventional sectors that were interested in taking advantage of his expertise. He accepted a position as advisor in an emerging technological startup in Seattle and returned on weekends to meet with Isabel. Alma's resurgence. During that time, Alma experienced a notable growth. After leaving behind the darkness of an unhappy marriage, she gave herself completely to her creative impulses. Together with Marianne Cabot, she joined to initiate a solidarity project from soul to soul, focused on offering emotional and economic support to pregnant women who were experiencing situations of abandonment or problems in the home. The reason touched very intimate fibers of her own experience. The backing of prominent personalities and the solidarity contacts of Enzo Roman motivated the arrival of donations. The gossip about the possible relationship between Alma and Enzo did not take long to appear. The gossip blogs were full of speculations about a possible love relationship between the generous magnate and the mother who had just divorced. For an extensive period, Alma opted not to pay attention to the comments, partly due to her own uncertainty about her emotions. She appreciated the camaraderie she had with Enzo, valued the trust and knowledge he offered her. However, a new flame emerged, which was genuine, based on reciprocal admiration, instead of on scandal or ambition. The instant of Enzo and Alma. On an autumn day, several months after Isabel arrived in the world, Enzo decided to invite Alma to visit a community center recently inaugurated in a disadvantaged area, which he had sponsored. While they walked through the corridors, debating about expanding the childcare areas and the consultation spaces, their hands touched unintentionally. Alma looked up and perceived in Enzo's look a warmth that reflected the incipient affection he felt. In that instant of calm, they discovered a closeness that was starting to emerge. They did not hurry. The two knew perfectly well that Alma continued recovering from the wounds caused by Paul's disloyalties. Enzo demonstrated patience by allowing her to set the pace. The first time they went out together as an official couple was at a modest dinner in a cozy Italian restaurant away from the luxurious places of the urban center. While they enjoyed the delicious homemade pasta, they conversed extensively, finding values in common and a shared goal, a peaceful and meaningful existence, away from the false comforts of opulence. Despite that, Alma always kept Isabel as her main concern. Her determination was to raise her daughter, providing her affection and a stable environment. Surprisingly, from time to time, Paul let see moments of authenticity. In the morning, he sent her a message. "I appreciate the opportunity to form part of Isabel's day-to-day. I will not make mistakes with her, as I committed them with you." The words impacted Alma, but they also carried with them the melancholy of what could have happened. The end of a stage, the attraction of this public for scandals, lost strength with time, being replaced by recent news about conflicts between celebrities and political disputes. Alma's story went unnoticed in the media, relegated to a small space at the end of an article. A pregnant woman who had to deal with the disloyalty of her wealthy husband and came out strengthened from the situation. However, in her personal life, it was not a negative example. It was about a newly created path, characterized by compassion, the capacity for recovery, and faith in the future. The last episode of Paul's Fall settled like dust, imparting teachings to all those involved. Lara discovered that cunning has its restrictions, especially upon confronting Enzo's moral integrity. Paul realized that triumph without fidelity nor honesty, sooner or later, ends up crumbling. Alma found her own voice, guaranteeing that she would not be eclipsed again by the ambition or disloyalty of others. The future of Alma and Enzo. With the passing of time, the connection between Alma and Enzo strengthened discreetly. Upon witnessing Isabel's first steps, Enzo encouraged her with the same happiness as Alma. He did not occupy the role of father. Although the place continued being property of Paul, he knew how to offer affection and paternal advice in a very special way. During the community activities, the three adults could maintain an effective relationship. Paul valued Enzo's company without the haughtiness that used to characterize him, perhaps solely because he ensured that Alma and Isabel had a comfortable life. In a moment of privacy, far from foreign looks, Enzo asked Alma to marry him. While they enjoyed a romantic candlelight dinner in her home, with Isabel resting in the room upstairs, he knelt and showed a modest ring. Alma could not contain the tears upon recalling the suffering she had experienced in past times. Her mind filled with all the suffering experienced until now. However, there stood planted a man who had demonstrated a solid fidelity, respect, and kindness. She expressed her opinion firmly. Yes, for a time they kept their engagement secret. They only revealed it to their intimate friends and family. Upon the news finally being divulged, it turned out unexpectedly without controversies. At that moment, Alma had become a benefactor recognized by her own merit. Enzo is considered almost a legend in the world of capitalism for his commitment to social responsibility. The union between them represented something more than a love story. It symbolized the victory of honesty against disloyalty, the capacity for recovery before the lack of love. The marriage of Alma and Enzo. On a radiant day, with Marianne Cabot present, they married in an intimate celebration in the garden of her home. Isabel, the little one who carried flowers with her, scattered rose petals along the aisle, surrounded by the loved ones of the bride and groom. Paul found himself standing in the back, watching the ceremony in complete silence. He presented himself with the purpose of granting his blessing and accompanying Isabel on a day that would be determinant for the destiny of his family. Shortly after he left, but before doing so, he shared a respectful look with Enzo and said in a low voice to Alma, "I am truly happy for you." Alma squeezed her hand over Enzo's, feeling the complex emotions that accompanied that moment, understanding the importance of all shared experiences. Finally, the accumulation of suffering led her towards a state of authentic love, gratitude, and meaning. We appreciate your company on this journey, full of ambition, deceptions, and in the end, redemption. If the story of the wealthy man revealing his lover captivated you, and then being surprised by the unexpected appearance of his wife in a state of gestation, if the surprising links and the moments of introspection reached your heart, show us your backing. If this story had you on edge, share with your friends who like the intensity of reality mixed with surprising emotional turns. Do not miss our future narratives by subscribing. Each story we share analyzes the complexity of human relationships by offering preventive teachings and flashes of optimism. With your backing, you contribute to our growth and allow us to continue sharing moving stories. Do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and be aware of future emotional dramas.